Hello and welcome to My View from the Piano Bench. We do this on Wednesday evenings, premiering at 7 p.m. here on my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel, in addition to Piano for My Friends on Thursday evenings. Thank you for those of you who support and encourage me via the links you'll find on the support page of my website. You'll see that link in the video description. If you watch these videos, either or both, with some regularity, I'll ask that you consider one of the occasional drop in the tip jar options. One of those options is the Patreon option, which is set up to be a monthly recurring drop in the tip jar, and any regular support such as that will elicit from me a thank you email each month with exclusive audio or video content, often behind the scenes and inside the process. So, on Wednesday nights, I go into a little exploration verbally, which is, I want to say riskier, but just more of a crapshoot, or like I'll say at the mainstay, it's a crapshoot every time I get on the microphone. It's usually safer just playing, and I enjoy doing that on the Thursday night videos. But I'll share some thought or insight or something, hopefully, that's relevant or interesting. And thank you to those who have expressed to me that this is interesting. So in recent months, I've kind of gravitated to, for many of these topics, picking a song that I play very often, and then just kind of unscripted, talking through things about the song, about playing the song, experiences about the song. And it's kind of a way for me to introduce some different angles into this. And you'll see as a topic, the song title, Ain't Misbehavin'. And I'll play just a little bit of that at this point. The good old Fats Waller tune from, I believe, I was going to say 1929, but that might be Honeysuckle Rose, so I don't know. But from that era. That's passable for a bit of Fats Waller's Ain't Misbehavin'. So when I was a teenager in the 1970s, and if you know me, you're aware of this, I was plied with Benny Goodman Trio records by Joe Mederi, and that introduced me to that whole era of jazz. So the pianist in that trio was Teddy Wilson. So that's how I got my first big listen to. Concentrated listening, and that really impacted my playing. And I listened to it so much that I kind of gravitated hard enough in that direction that people were telling me that's what I sounded like, or I was the kid who played like Teddy Wilson back at the time. But the next pianist, kind of concurrently, but after I was introduced to Teddy Wilson, was Fats Waller. And listening to Fats Waller is what developed my left hand sensibility to stride. Because Teddy Wilson really wasn't a stride player. And I struggled for a good while, really trying to use my left hand the way Teddy Wilson did. It was interesting that I was called the kid who played like Teddy Wilson because the left hand was, at the time, more Waller-esque. And I have a better feel for that kind of accompanying without a bass player, Teddy Wilson style, now than I did back then. But at no time am I immune from hitting wrong notes when I stride, as I just demonstrated. Which is why I don't play stride up tempo. If I do, it's not very clean. And also why I don't bill myself as a stride pianist. I work that in, neo stride or stride influenced. Now, back when I was a teenager, I did give myself that label, and that was out of ignorance. Because I had done so much listening to Waller, and I had picked that whole thing up with the walking tenths and the tenths and the bass, and I'll talk to him about that. But giving myself that label implies that I understand what led up to Fats Waller. Fats Waller, to me, is the Johann Sebastian Bach of stride piano. He was the guy who, after him, the era closed in terms of being, an era of pianists who did that, and that was the evolution at the time and the expression of the culture and all of that. Just like with Bach and the Baroque period of classical music. Historians date that period pretty much uniformly to the life of Bach, born in 1685, died in 1750. There's the Baroque period. And if you listen really to anything that came after Bach, he was the height of expression of everything leading up to him. And then it changed thereafter because it had to. He took it as far as he could go. He perfected it. And you could argue that Fats Waller did that with stride. And the people that he influenced, which was a number of people, but most prominently Art Tatum, continued to play stride kind of things, but took it in a whole nother direction. And there are people today who bill themselves as stride pianists, and more authentically than I, because not just a ton of listening to Fats, but everything leading up to Fats, which I didn't really pay attention to, starting with Jelly Roll Morton and the James P. and the way the Lion Smith, and I need to learn some of those things. I still poke around with Carolina Shout, but I'm just not comfortable with it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the specific kind of virtuosity that comes out of that stride era. And the hands were bigger, of those pianists. It's harder to do something big with smaller hands. I'm not tiny. There are pianists who have smaller hands than mine, but they're certainly not large hands. I can barely reach a tenth, but I can do it. Now, what I would call that is stride influence piano. But whatever it is specifically that I do, Fats Waller has an important part in it in terms of me listening to records and such. So that's a go-to tune for me to play. That and Honeysuckle Rose. Which you notice I didn't do the stride thing. It wouldn't have been clean. Or This Jordan Is Jumping, which took me a long time to figure out how I could be comfortable playing it. And again, by kind of avoiding a lot of the stride. I'll grab some occasionally and do other things here. But ain't misbehaving. It's still a mixed bag, but a lot of the back and forth striding. So Ain't Misbehavin' is kind of the go-to. If I have to do something stride, that's a nice tempo. And that'll often be a solo feature for me, like with the Madeira Band or something like that. So the obvious thing to talk about, jump into, and possibly jump off from later, or maybe just live here, is the idea of stride piano. So I mentioned that Fats Waller really perfected it and all of the playing around it. And the one sensibility I don't bring to stride is that third frilly stuff, that kind of stuff. I tend to be a more linear melodic player, so I'll go in deference to that occasionally. That's why Carolina Shout gives me trouble. I need bigger hands. When I slowed it down, you could see everything's in moving thirds. And I like to play melodic movement, which actually let me jump around a minute before I talk about stride specifically. Oftentimes, if you hear me play this tune in a performance setting, I will take a bass solo on it. So the left hand, when I don't consider myself a complete stride player, that doesn't mean I don't consider myself an appropriate, no rhythm section, cover all the parts myself player, because I do, and that's what I do in many applications. But for me, that's not just a certain particular way of striding. It's also how I voice my chords, how I put melodic leading in, and how I walk the bass line a la Dave McKenna. And for me, that all comes out of my more global stride sensibility, and I guess that's what you call it. Scott Yano said something nice in the one review we have so far for the Blossom Deary project. We'll be getting more in the coming weeks. I'm really looking forward to seeing where that goes. But he goes right away. He gets it. And Scott knows me to some extent. He says because of his background in playing stride piano, and I won't object because he didn't call me a stride pianist, but because of his background in playing stride piano, I'm able to function as a one-man rhythm section behind Sharon. Because the concert he reviewed, which you can find through my webpage if you look for it, was a live stream duo concert. And what he's talking about is I'm used to filling up the space. And in a more contemporary feel, contemporary meaning post-stride in this case, a swing or beyond, you rely on the bass player. Now I'm moving my hand around because my left hand thinks it's a bass player a lot of times. And when I started doing the Dave McKenna influenced stride piano, walking bass line thing, now, this is not McKenna influence, but I said to myself, well, if my left hand's a bass player, I want my left hand to be able to take a solo. and it was rough. And this is where, although practicing is really vital, of course, playing gigs is really, that's where the school is. You always hear me say the stage is our school as musicians, right? So I was doing a ton of solo restaurant gigs, and I would try to take a bass solo, and the left hand just wasn't working. So I would like do a cross hand. In fact, I haven't done this for so long, I just confused myself. Wow, that's not even good anymore. But that's how I used to solo as a bass player, because my right hand was used to that. But I just made myself do it and do it and do it. Now my left hand is a little less technically proficient than my right. I'm right-handed. And Ain't Misbehavin' is a tune I just like to do that on. Kind of almost as if it were a tuba player. Because if you think about like the late 1920s, early 1930s, more often than not, the bass player in the band was a tuba player. Could be a bass sax, could be an upright bass, but typically a tuba. Can you hear that tuba playing? Those low notes? Playing them wrong? Wait a minute. Play the right note, tuba player. Play the right chord, guitar player. Can you imagine those notes being a tuba player? And I do imagine those notes being a tuba player. So when I'm playing a tune like Ain't Misbehavin', my bass lines are articulated with the idea of being a tuba more than a walking upright or perhaps even an electric bass. So when I solo as a tuba player with my left hand on Ain't Misbehavin', I'm envisioning, or feeling, I should say, what a tuba player would do. And let me see. So let me maybe play two choruses of Ain't Misbehavin'. Let's see if I can state the melody a little bit better. And then I'll take a tuba solo. I like to do that with this tune. So much for playing the melody better. Okay, so could you kind of follow that as if my left hand was a tuba player? That's fun to do. Now, about that stride stuff, and I could consider it questionable a little bit that I make this tune a tune I play if I want to throw the stride stuff out, because E flat's a slightly harder key, and that's the stock key for Ain't Misbehavin'. Now, I don't know how much you can see my left hand, this 10th interval in E flat requires me to reach a little deeper to get E flat with my little finger and G with my thumb. And I don't know if you can see, but I don't have a clean hit on either note. So for those who look at me and say, "Oh, your hands are big, you can play the..." No, look, I can't cover the width of either note. I barely make it. I don't know if you can see, but my little finger is just touching the edges of that E flat down there. And the F next to this G up top is partly going down. It's really there. I can reach around it. And I know in one of these videos before I talked about this, so if you heard me talk about it then, I'm saying exactly the same thing, which hopefully I'm not. But if I am, apologies and bear with me. So I picked all this up from listening to records. And I didn't read transcriptions. I didn't write transcriptions. I listened to records and played with other musicians. And after listening to Fats Waller for a while, I realized there was more going on than goes on in, say, ragtime music. Now, ragtime music and the bass will often double in octaves, whatever the bass note is, which is kind of redundant, which is just a more forceful version of playing just a single note. I cheated. So either single notes or octaves. And in listening to the Fats Waller recordings, of course on a record player, I realized when he goes down to those bass notes, he's hitting the note, the interval distance we would call a tenth above. Okay, a little bit of music wonkiness here, but non-musicians, you'll be able to hang. So if I play a scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, kind of major scale, I go up and I number the notes as I go. And I'm doing it in C because C has no black keys. So you know if you're playing a C major scale and you hit a black key, you're playing a wrong note. That's pretty simple. And that's the only scale that's applicable to. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 degrees of the scale. And then as we go on, there's actually a lot of circumstances where you would continue beyond 8 into the next octave. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Then you're done. 9 and 2 are the same position in the scale, the same note name. But if you say something like a chord is a ninth chord, it implies the notes below it. But if you call this interval a tenth and not a third, see what I did here? The C to E, 10, C to E, 3. We're calling it a 10 because of the spacing, right? The third of the chord an octave higher, you could say. I don't know what I'm playing, and I'm doing a pretty good job of not knowing what I'm playing and sounding like I don't know what I'm playing. But that interval of the 10, to go back to Misbehavin, and I'm trying to avoid maneuvering around, but for the most part, there it is. So single notes. Sometimes you have to know what additional 10th note to hit. But realizing that in order to play authentic strata, I had to reach the 10th. I couldn't, especially one like this. And I would sit in my high school. I do remember doing this in Algebra 3 class. That class was a nightmare. But anyhow, stretched my hand so that I could draw a straight line without majorly cupping my wrist. And that's how I learned to be able to reach this. And I was good for a while until I realized, wait a minute now, doing more listening. You got to remember too, late 20s, early 30s recordings are only so good in terms of fidelity. So sometimes something doesn't strike you. Oh my goodness, he's playing another note in the chord inside that 10th interval. Again, that was sloppy as heck, but so one thing that distinguishes stride, doesn't always have to happen, and some guys don't do it at all, but to me, an important part of the stride thing, especially the Waller-esque stride, is the 10th movement. And we call this walking tense, just like we call that a walking bass. So let me just play a completely different tune. Now I'm just going to play single note bass line, and you would still call this stride. Okay, and I got that far before I started manipulating things around, right? But that stride. So for me, even playing a just diagonal stride thing like Ain't Misbehavin', I'm going to wind up eventually focusing on the melodic movement of those upper notes in the 10th, or just the notes in the chord. Because melody is what makes something sound good. And melody is what makes an accompaniment truly complementary and the best kind of accompaniment it can be. It's not just picking up rocks and rearranging them like you'll hear me describe chords. So, another thing with this music though, I could just like not do any stride at all on a tune like Ain't Misbehavin' and be totally comfortable. Do some open tens. That was a mess. But if I don't do any deference to this, I feel like I'm leaving something out that's important, just historically. So a lot of times you'll hear me play a tune, there could be a stride tune like this, whatever, particularly if it's really up-tempo. And I'll do, whatever I do, this is taking the 10th and breaking it up. I'm not really going like this because I'm going to miss all kind of notes. But at some point, I'll take the chance at like half a chorus. Oh, see how terrible that is? Yeah, and here's where I guess I'm a bit of a contradiction, because the advice I'll always give, especially to myself, is don't throw spaghetti at things. Don't play something unless you know it works with the same amount of confidence that, like, that the word you're using is the right word, right? And that includes not just the choice, but the technical ability to pull it off, or the word, to know how to pronounce it, right? But I feel so uh, I just feel compelled to attempt to tip the hat in up tempo to the stride thing. And really, I probably shouldn't. But back when I was a teenager doing a Teddy Wilson thing, I didn't have a concept of the sparser left hand. And it was always a mess down there. You know, I could never entirely play a clean up tempo. So like a tune like China Boy, which is an F, which was a Goodman Trio thing that I would always play with Joe and Paul. I was happy. But that wasn't China Boy. I don't know what that was. And so, as long as somebody else is playing the melody, like when Joe dearie, take 50 choruses on the clarinet. I don't want to play a solo on that tune, and I love just playing behind it. But then eventually, I get exposed, and I have to take a solo. And I'm much more comfortable now at doing what Teddy Wilson would do and not try to fill the space. But back then, I would be sloppy as heck. Hopefully I'm slightly less sloppy than that, actually. Where did that come from? Oh, welcome to my brain, right? Here's a tempo that I love for anything. Melodic movement in the left hand. Now I'll jinx myself, but I can hit this kind of accurately. Oops. Oh, that's a tuba solo then. Why do I allow things like that to happen? All right. Now, I'm talking about melodic movement in accompanying. And not to get super wonky, but taking notes that we call leading tones and letting them lead us to the next place without playing a whole bunch of notes. And there are some harmonic progressions or progressions of chords, especially in contemporary jazz, where the leading tones are less applicable, you know, and you have to have more disconnected things, or it comes out that way. And interestingly, this tune is like that in the bridge. The chord changes are unusual, and if you're not a super experienced player, and even if you are, when you first encounter this tune, you have to kind of just commit the chord changes in the bridge to memory, as opposed to like realizing what's going on. And by bridge, I mean the middle section of the tune. A form. That's the first A, and it repeats. And you get to the B, or the bridge. Right? And that's the different section. So that's what I'm talking about, the bridge. And actually, I could talk a lot about this bridge. So the bridge starts in C minor. And that makes total sense, because C minor is what we call the relative minor of E flat major. In other words, if I play E flat major as a scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but I start on sol, ti, do instead of do, re, mi, there's my C minor scale. Both have 3 flats in the key signature. So if you were to see a key signature for any key, but let's say 3 flats, which would be E flat major, you actually don't know if the piece is E flat major or C minor until you look at it or play it. So a C minor chord in the key of E flat is, right down the middle. Right? Then you go to what we would call a dominant 4 chord, an A flat 7. Which doesn't exist in the key of E flat, and that was just like the F7, C7, B flat. That actually like breaks the theory book rules of the time, and actually makes me want to adjust things because I want to hear things more connected than that. But C minor, A flat 7, C. Then I'll usually sneak a chord in between the C and where the bridge keeps going to, which is B flat. This is too technical now. So what happens, the bridge goes through those unusual chord changes in the traditional sense and then lands on B flat. We've talked about this before. When is it a modulation and when it is not? So if you listen to Misbehavin, what you'll hear in the bridge is you're going to be in the same key you were started in. Then you're going to start moving around, and you're going to set up something where you're going to feel like you're in the key of B flat for a short time, but then it becomes a B flat dominant chord. In other words, a B flat chord repositions itself to take you back to E flat. So if you ever really left E flat, that's the kind of thing musicians argue about, like, biblical scholars argue about, what are the most accurate or earliest or authentic texts, right? Something like that. So here's the bridge. C minor, A flat. C, B flat. So that's a complete phrase. Look, there goes another rubber tree plant. So who'd have thought High Hopes was part of Ain't Misbehavin'? See, Fats Waller, he plagiarized High Hopes, except he didn't because it was written like 20, 30 years later. So maybe the other way around, right? It sounds like... Because of the series of movement, the transition back to E flat, right? So here's the bridge again. Move it around. And we're back in E flat. So let me try to pull this back from the wonky to something a little more conceptual and cleaner to hug, which is the idea that most music that you listen to is tonal music. So it has what we call a tonal center. So let me play. So no matter how I dress that up, it comes from the C scale, and that C is just grounding. It just grounds everything, right? And it's obvious when you hear it, but once you hear it stated, it kind of like stays with you. No time that you lose your relationship to this being a tonal center, and the music made sense because of that. So every song has a tonal center. Now, there are occasions when the tonal center will shift, which means the whole sort of global center of gravity of the tune shifts. But if, in effect, the tonal center shifts for just a little period of time, you don't really feel displaced, and you go back to where you started, and you feel like you hadn't really left, if that makes sense. So that's what's going on in Misbehavin. You know, we're setting up this tune in this tonal center, and then it just gets adventuresome in the bridge, you know, flirts with leaving the tonal center, but doesn't. It teases you, you know, and it moves a little bit, and then it just like does a little jig and shimmies back to where it's supposed to be. Make any sense? So let me play one pass through the tune again. Oh, let me stop. See, I only got 2 or 4 bars in. So you hear this ascending bass line. Now that note is kind of like the top of the excitement driven thing about getting louder and getting up and moving upward. See me come back down. When you're listening to music played the way it should be played, or just well played music, you're going to hear those things which help you ebb and flow with it, right? And the volume of the music is one of those very important things. You heard me gradually get louder, and everything just, you know, more excitement. So I got up here and I go, like, yeah, but then I start coming down. Right? So that ebb and flow is really important. Now, if I had played this on like a classical organ or harpsichord, I wouldn't be able to do that because those instruments aren't capable of getting soft and loud, aren't capable of that variation. Now, I tried to be more flat there. Nothing wrong with that. But something maybe a little extra juicy, and, you know, hopefully it doesn't leave a stain. Yeah, here we go. Right? Yeah. Oops. Ah. So you always want to, or at least me as a musician, look for ways to bring linear melodic movement in what's going on. And that's a fun thing about when I get to play with a bass player. I move from bass lines to what somebody called this, labeled what I do is play cello lines, and I've grabbed onto that, and that's pretty much what it is. So, and the more of that wonderful, like, linear melodic movement you have, the more expressive you can be. I mean, you can certainly be expressive. You know what I mean. Just be emotive, right? Okay, my friend Beth is probably not watching this, but if you are, I went over 45 minutes, or approximately, without quoting Manhattan until just then. That's good. I usually quote Manhattan about every minute and a half. So, yeah, so I'll tell you what. Just envision the tuba player. You don't need to care about the melody, because I ain't going to sing it, because I want to keep my job. So this is the line. Boom, 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 Boy, I'm going to stop because I actually just painted myself in the corner and fell down. Now, that's the thing about playing and thinking for me. There's lots of musicians who are very cerebral and take intellectually something to a very high level. But when I start thinking about, an agenda item that I'm going to be doing in the song, it usually makes me fall down. However, if I think about something like what I'm planning to have for lunch tomorrow, or what my grocery list is, or, there's a ladybug over here, let me stare at her. That opens it up for me, which is a whole nother subject. And somebody should remind me I said this. I don't know how I would talk about it yet, but I would call it playing or even living from your peripheral vision. That's where the real meat and potatoes are, not what's right in front of you. So I had a hard time pulling that off. That's funny. I couldn't just do it, right? All right, so very simple bass line pattern for those of you who are musicians, or even if you're not. If you have a chord, you have a root, third, and a fifth. If you extend it at all, you extend it to the seventh. And depending on what the function is, depends on what seventh it is. But let's take this C7 chord, technically C dominant 7. And of course that chord expresses something. It expresses, hey, we're not done yet. Can you hear that we're not done yet? Now we're done. Okay. Anyway, so those two notes, they create that sense of not being done. The notes that we call the leading tones, or the notes that color and define the specific sound of the chord, are in contrast to the defining notes of the nature of the chord. The C chord with a C in the bass. Ready to polka? We'll even have a better better polka if we alternate the root and the fifth of the chord. Root 5, root 5. That's your basic 2-beat bass line pattern. So if you play the piano or whatever, you can figure out a C chord, and you can get enough coordination to alternate root chord, fifth chord, root chord, fifth chord. Of course, you don't have any hands left to play anything else. That's when it gets tricky. So Strat piano could reduce to that. And that reminds me, though, of a guitar player I knew a long time ago who would like to say, I can take any random person off a street corner and in 15 minutes teach them to play bass guitar in a country band. Because that's what you're getting. I really digress. And the idea of the stride thing is kind of an evolution of the basic polka or country or even ragtime thing. Takes it to the next place. And Fats Waller, of course, wrote some wonderful tunes. You know, when you really like get into tunes of the 20s and especially late 20s and early 30s, there's fantastic writing. U.B. Blake tune Memories of You from I think 1930. Without the clam I just put in. So anyway, this is a bit rambling, but hopefully it was good for something. like the equivalent of the jet coming into the airport and overrunning the runway at the landing, right? And I'm winding up in a cornfield with my little jet. Oh my goodness. But anyway, I just sort of let myself go. Hopefully this is interesting. I welcome your feedback, and I certainly appreciate you being here. Keep in touch. Things are, yeah, I'm saying this every week now, but every week things are changing. And things don't always go on my web calendar immediately, because sometimes they have to be defined and they have to be finally confirmed and stuff. But it's pretty clear that this year is, I was saying this to somebody earlier today, in fact, I always wondered, back when I used to travel a lot, and then different things about my circumstance changed, and I kind of just took root here where I live on the Eastern Shore of Maryland and did very little traveling for like 15 years or so. And I'd always assumed it would come back, and yes, I'm already like planning more trips this year than I've taken in the last however many years combined. It's going to be fun, and it's going to be a challenge for me to keep this up. And sometimes, I don't do it at the optimal time of day for me because I can't. But I try to be awake, alert, alive, and enthusiastic and all of that. But thank you for your encouragement, because your encouragements keep me going and keep me doing this. And if you're interested in it and provide that encouragement, then I'm going to keep going, because it's been a fun ride. All right. But, more fun than the airplane overrunning the runway, right? Okay. So thanks so much. I'll see you tomorrow night, hopefully, for Piano for My Friends. Yay.